Hello, everyone. Well, welcome back. We just finished medical terminology. Now we're going to move into the human body. This is one of those things that, like we said, with terminology is super important. You have to know the human body. You've got to know the different names, the parts, the systems, the organs, the connective tissue, those kind of things to be able to understand so much about emergency medicine and medicine in general. So buckle up, man. We're gonna go. We're gonna get this through, get this done. And anytime that you guys have questions, please ask. I'm just a stone's throw away from the classroom. Just come right next door. My office is always open. You can come see me. The door is open. Come on in. Uh, this way we can talk more about it. And of course, you can also use your instructors as resources as well. So let's get started on the human body. So you have got to have a working knowledge of what the human body does. Its anatomy, its physiology, anatomy being its structure. It is the field of study that focuses on the physical structure of the body and its system. The physiology examines the normal functions and activities of the body and its systems. And then pathophysiology is the study of the functional changes that accompany or to be a part when somebody has a disease, a syndrome, or an injury. So, anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology. If you go into paramedic school, my goodness, we go so much more in depth than when we touch the surface on this one. But let's get started on these three components, okay? All right, so topographic anatomy. Now, you remember that we talked about abduction, adduction, we talked about anterior, posterior, ventral versus dorsal, those kind of things. So now we're going to give you the overview or the anatomy surface structures that gives you an understanding external to internal and those relationships and the fundamentals to an effective patient assessment and how we can use this to our advantage in order to do a good comprehensive assessment of the patients. And then directional terminology. This ensures the consistency and the clarity of the communication. That comes back to that medial and lateral, those kind of things. And then anatomic positions. The patient stands facing you, arms at his side and palms forward. Planes of the body. Imaginary straight lines that divide the body. We have three main areas, the coronal, sagittal, mid-sagittal, and the transverse. Very simple. Coronal is the frontal plane. Okay, sagittal is the lateral planes. It divides left and right. Mid-sagittal or the midline plane divides the right half, so the axis into halves, both right and left. That's different from the body itself because the body, sagittal is on the lateral side, remember, external, and the mid-sagittal is the midline side towards the middle of the body. Don't confuse yourself on that. And then your transverse or your axial plane is just top and bottom. Okay, top and bottom. Simple. Simple, simple. There you go. There's your little actual diagram. It's in your book. Unless that gives you that information there. The same thing we just talked about. Your frontal and transverse and your sagittal. Your mid is obviously in there. Sagittal is your lateral planes from left to right, and then your mid sagittal will be only from the mid part. Cells. Okay, cells are the foundation. There are billions of cells in your body, from the very tip of your head to the tip of the very finest hair you got down to your toenail. All right, there's billions of cells. Cells are the foundation. Cells that share common function forms what we call tissue. So these cells all do the same thing. So if they do same thing, same functions, we call that tissue. Groups of tissue that perform similar or interrelated type of jobs, we call those organs. The heart is surrounded by cells and tissues that are cardiac tissues, cardiac cells. So it forms the heart. That's the word cardio means heart. Organs with similar functions to work together to comprise a body system is the overall package. Okay. Skeletal system, the anatomy. It provides the structure. Without the skeletons or the bones, we'd just be a big blob of goo. Okay, that's it. Laying on the floor, kind of slithering around the like that kind of thing. It also establishes the framework that the soft tissues are able to attach to the internal organs. Also the connective tissues, the joints, the elbows, and all that kind of stuff, the tendons and the ligaments that join everything together so that we can move around. It also protects our vital organs. Okay, like for instance, the ribs, they're protecting from blunt trauma, your lungs, your heart, your liver, those kind of things. And then, of course, the red marrow inside the actual center part of the bones, they create our red blood cells. They rejuvenate our red blood cells that need to be rejuvenated as they get old and wear out, and that are discarded, from our spleen. That's where our spleen takes care of those things, the dying blood cells. So, again, those red marrow have to replace those blood cells. So that's what our functions or a skeletal system is. All right, so the bones, there's 206 of them. We have what's called the axial skeletal, the appendicular skeleton, and the pelvis. Pretty simple stuff. The axillar is the axis body, the center, the core, the trunk of the body. Okay. Then you have the appendicular appendages, stuff out here, okay, the appendages, all right, appendicular skeleton. Then you have the pelvis that connect those two together, okay. So the 206 bones, the axial skeletal forms all the longitudinal axis of the body from the skull to the coccyx. Coccyx, your tailbone. It includes the skull, facial bones, thoracic cage, and vertebral column. The appendicular skeletal, that's pretty simple. That's what we said, the extremities, both upper and lower. And the pelvis includes the portions from both the axial and the skeletal system, appendicular skeletals. All right, where the two bones meet are joints. Okay, there's your joints there. Ligaments are fibrous tissue, okay, that connect the bone to the bone, helping stabilize the joint. Cartilage is the semi-rigid and flexible tissue that covers and cushions the ends of the articulating bones. And then tendons, they attach bone to muscle. Tendons attach bone to muscle, okay? Ligaments connect bone to bone. Please don't get those mixed up. You're going to miss that on the test. I mean, it's simple. Bones are connected to each other by ligaments, okay? And the bones to the muscles are connected by tendons. Cartilage is that soft, cushy stuff that keeps them, nice and soft and squishy. It keeps everything moving. Symphysis are joints where only slight movement is possible. And then the bone ends of a joint are held together by a fibrinous sac called a joint capsule. Okay. The articular cartilage allows for the ends of the bones to glide gently. And then a synovial membrane is the inner lining of the joint capsule, which produces synovial fluid, otherwise good old WD-40 for our bones. So they can glide with each one in each other. This is a great diagram because it explains all that. It's got all that in there. Shows you. All right, there's your joints. Now let's talk about the types of joint. Ball and socket and hinge. As you can see here, this guy's pretty simple. It's a ball and socket. There's your ball and there's your socket. Example of that is the pelvis. Okay. This is the greater trochanter as it plugs into the acetabulum. That acetabulum is the actual socket part, and the greater trochanter is the ball part. And look at this guy here, the hinge joint. It's your elbow. Okay, it's a hinge. Okay, it looks just like that. That hinge, the motion of a hinge joint is restricted only to flexion and tension. When, like for instance, my ball and socket, my shoulder, it can go full rotation. So that's another example of a ball and socket, where the humerus goes into the acromial process of the shoulder. Okay? So those are two different types of joints that we have. All right, so the axial skeleton, remember the skull, the facial bones, the thoracic cage, the vertebral column. Let's talk about the skull first. There you go. There's the skull cranium, the foramen magnum, and the facial bones. This is in your book. I want you to really pay specific attention to this guy right here. This is the foramen magnum. It is the opening in the bottom of the skull that your spinal column fuses as a part of your brain into the lower part of your brain called the pons and the medulla. This is where your breathing center is, your cardiovascular center. Once it gets cut from there, you cease to exist. You die. So it's a very important part. That's why it's in the very lower part of the skull. It's very well protected. And then, of course, all the bones are here. They're listed for you. Do you need to know these? Yes, you really do. You need to especially know the maxillae, the mandible, zygomatic bone, ethmoid bone, nasal bones. You're going to see test questions about this. What is the parietal bone? It's right here. It's your forehead. Okay, it's the not the forehead, but it's the top of your head. The frontal bone is your forehead. So you're going to be asked questions like that. You need to be able to answer that, especially about the foramen magnum. The skull really consists of 28 bones that are divided into groups: the cranium, the facial bones, and the 3 small bones of the ear. So that's your cranium right there. That's your skull. All right, so the spinal column is composed of 33 bones or vertebrae. Remember we talked about vertebrae, okay, are more than once. Vertebra would be 1. You have 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and then 4 coccyx, okay, vertebrae. One of the ways to remember this is just think about how your day progresses, okay? You have breakfast at 7, okay? You have lunch at 12, okay? You have dinner at 5, okay? You have a glass of wine at 5 with dinner, okay? And then around 4 o'clock, you get up in the middle of the night, you go to the bathroom, or you start your day. I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day, between 4 and 4:30. Of course, I go to bed at 8:30 at night. So relate this to whatever it is that you need. 712-554. 712-554. Sounds like a password you could make for your, like your Yahoo account or something. But pick out a way that you can remember that, and it'll help you. Cervical, okay, thoracic, lumbar, sacral, coccyx. Okay, very easy. Here's that foramen magnum again. This is that hole. You can see the spinal column goes right up through it. The cord itself runs in the middle. Okay, and all of these little appendages that you see here and here and here, they're your nerves. So you have the same duplicate set on left and on right. It's what controls us being able to feel and touch. They're motor and sensory nerves, and we'll talk about that later. But this is all stuff that you need to know. Remember, the cerebellum is in the bottom, okay, and the cerebrum is in the top. That's just an easy way to think about it. And your brainstem is what comes up through that foramen magnum. Easy way to think about it. You're gonna have to memorize this stuff because you're gonna see this on a test. Okay, so be prepared. Right, so in that thoracic cavity, this is the center part, your chest, okay, as you can see here, this is in your book, your heart, lungs, your esophagus, and all your great vessels are there. It's formed by 12 thoracic vertebrae. Those are the bones that are in the back. Vertebra, 1 vertebrae, meaning plural, okay, more than one, and 12 pairs of rib, and the sternums. The sternum is divided up in the manubrium. Everybody take your finger and find that bump. You can start by the little, notch, this little notch right here, okay? Or you can feel that soft tissue. It's like, God, if I push too hard, I'll choke, okay? That is your sternal notch that you can see, and then go just below that to that first bump. That's your manubrium. Then you have the body. You're doing CPR. When you're doing CPR on this part of the sternum. Don't want to get too low because you don't want to break off the xiphoid process. You want to be in the middle of that body so that you're compressing the heart appropriate enough to do CPR. Appendicular skeleton, the upper extremities, the pelvis and the lower extremities. Remember the appendages. Okay, from the upper extremities, here you go. Looking at this guy, starting at the top, your clavicle. Everybody feel up there, that bone up there on the top. Everybody knows what your clavicle is. Go, okay, what direction am I headed in? I am headed medially this way, okay. That's your subclavicular joint. That's where the clavicle comes in. If I go lateral, okay, I'm going to the outside now. I feel that bump right there. That's the acromoclavicular joint. Okay, that's where the scapula has that appendage up on the top. This is all connected here. Right, this is all one bone that's a part of your scapula. And it has the glenohumeral joint, okay, which is a socket. Remember, we talked about ball and socket? And then the humerus has the ball. There's the ball right there. Okay, it plugs right in there. There's a series of ligaments that hold that in there. Okay, that keep that in there. That allow you to move that rotation round and round and round. Okay, this is easy if you just take it in sections. Okay, so this is the upper extremity section. Remember, you have a left, you have a right. Okay. You have a duplicate set of this appendicular skeleton, upper appendicular skeleton, on the other side. This is the left. Okay, remember, they talk about patients left and right. This is the left side. Okay, and then the arm, obviously you have the humerus, and then you have the forearm, which consists of the radius and the ulna. Radius, let's always remember one thing. I'm holding my arm up now. This is my right arm. Okay. The radius, okay, is always where the pulse is. This is your radial pulse, and it allows for this movement, okay? The ulna is to the outside. This is your ulna. It helps to facilitate rotation and more so strength and durability. But you can always remember the radius because it's on the inside. It's on the thumb side where the radial pulse is. Okay, so that's your radius. All right, so wrist, hand, ball and socket joint, principal bones, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. You can see these guys in here. The wrist and hand is a modified ball and socket joint formed by the ends of the radius and the ulna, okay, and of the carpal bones. Let's hold my hand up. Okay, for you, if I want to make it look a little closer that way, okay. But what you're seeing here is that hand up there is your right hand. All right, so all of your carpals are all in here. All right, all your carpals, okay, they're all located here as one. You have carpal and metacarpal joints. They look like little rocks in there, okay. The metacarpals themselves are what comes up to begin to go towards the end. Everything from right here on, the fingertips, are called phalanges, okay. Thumb, index, middle, ring, and little. You can also count it. First digit is thumb, second digit is index, third digit is middle, fourth digit is ring, and fifth digit is little. And they're all phalanges, okay? And as you can see here, the radius is located there. It's the closest to the thumb, see? And then the ulna is on the outside. Good job. All right, let's move on. Pelvis. Okay, pelvic girdle. Pelvic girdle consists of two large hip bones. We call those the coxae, which includes the sacrum and the coccyx. Each coxa is formed by a fusion of the ilium and the ischium and also the pubis. So you can see, I'm not telling you anything any different that's not on the board or not on the slide here. The pubic symphysis is the cartilage that joins the left and right pubic bones and limits movement between the bones. It articulates with the femur and the acetabulum. So we talked about the acetabulum. There's that guy. Okay, we talked about how the femur has the head on it, the greater trochanter, and that's what it plugs into, right in there like that. And it allows for that rotational movement because it's a ball and socket joint. Now, I also want to draw your attention to an introduction to the circulation system. This guy here is your descending aorta. Notice it's red. It's carrying oxygenated blood, okay? And it's high pressure. It is under pressure. And then over here is your inferior vena cava. Vena cava inferior, okay, notice it's blue. It's carrying unoxygenated blood. The blood that's oxygenated, the red stuff, is going to all your cells to rejuvenate them, okay, to resupply them with oxygen. And then the blue guy, the vena cava, is returning the unoxygenated blood back to the heart to be pumped into the lungs so it can be reoxygenated. It's just one big circulation system. That's all it is. But these vessels are very, very important, especially when we have trauma in the pelvic area. And we'll deal with that in the trauma section. We're only sticking with anatomy and physiology right now. Let's move on. Lower extremities, there you go. We've talked about this already. Femur is the longest and one of the strongest bones in the body, period. If you have a broken femur, there's a lot of kinetic energy that caused that. The femoral head or femoral head articulates within the acetabulum, like we were talking about earlier, as a ball and socket joint. Do not forget that because you'll see test questions about that. What is a ball and socket? What is a hinge joint? You need to be able to name those, okay? The greater and lesser trochanters serve as the anchor points for the major muscles of the thigh, okay? So I want to also tell you that in trauma, if you have a broken femur, those muscles go crazy because they're stretched, they're in an active mode. And when there's a fracture, now they, are not constricted anymore. They're now, they reflex back to one another and they spasm like crazy. It's very, very painful. The knee, it's a hinge joint. Remember we said hinge joints. We have ball and socket joints, we have hinge joints. So the pelvis is a ball and socket and the knee is a hinge joint. Don't miss those on tests. That's easy stuff that you should not be missing. If you miss it, I'm going to tell you about it because I'm already giving the answers already and you haven't even taken a test yet. So remember that. Okay, these are good stuff, good key points. They'll help you not only on your passing your program, but also your national registry. Lower extremities, ankle and foot. The foot comprises of tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. Remember we were talking about carpals and metacarpals. Well, now we're talking about tarsals. Phalanges are still the same thing. Phalanges are those distal ends. I do want to draw your attention to this, okay? And again, remember what part of the foot is this? Come on, you can tell me. Remember, I got a pain in my foot and it's inflamed. It's got an itis. Plantar fasciitis. Yeah, well, see that muscle right there? Okay, it's covered with fascia, and that becomes irritated, and that's why you have the bottom of your foot hurt. So we call that plantar fasciitis. Let's go back to the bones. All right, so your bones, your tibia and your fibia comes together, okay, and down here your tibia forms what's called the medial malleolus. Okay, medial malleolus. One of the ways you can remember a mallet, like a wooden mallet, that you wham, wham, you're going to knock something out. You're going to use a mallet to do that. And it's medial because it's on the inside. Your ankle bone is on the inside. That's that ankle bone part, on the inside. It's medial, okay? The talus is the first bone that it connects to, then it goes to the navicular, then it goes to the medial cuneiform. You can also break that down into when it extends out. The first bone here, which is right before your toes, is called the metatarsals. In your hand, we call that metacarpals. In your foot, we call it metatarsals. Okay, phalanges, still the same thing. It's the tip of your toes. It's those two bones that connect out of your metatarsal that create the phalanges so that you can have toes that you can wiggle around, help to give you balance. And then that muscle structure, we don't have to get into depth here, but there's muscle and cartilage. And this is your Achilles tendon, very, very important for walking purposes. So we don't have to get into that, but know that it's there. All right, so the functions of the skeletal system, we're going to talk about, specifically anatomy, physiology, and what, gives it shape. It protects fragile organs, allows for movement, stores calcium, and it creates red blood cells. Without it, we would die. We would never have new cells. All right, so about the anatomy, muscle is a form of tissue, okay? It facilitates movement, right? There's three types of muscle: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. I want you to remember that. These are test questions. Skeletal does exactly what it says it does. It connects the bones, okay? Smooth is a very specific tissue that allows for everything else to work. Okay, you got smooth muscles inside your intestines. All your muscles that allow for your organs to move freely and be attached to one another, they're called smooth muscles. Cardiac, it says itself, it's your heart. It's the only place that you're going to find cardiac. You don't have cardiac tissue in your foot. So cardiac is heart, smooth muscle is the stuff that's in between, and it's everything but your skeleton. It doesn't connect to any of your skeletal parts. So very, very simple, very, very easy stuff. When you break it down into easy stuff, it's easier to remember. It's not so hard. Also know that muscles can be voluntary and involuntary. Voluntary is stuff that my brain needs to tell it to do. I'm sorry, involuntary has to be something that's control of the brain. The muscles that are involuntary are the ones that absolutely work automatically. Okay, your heart, it works automatically. Okay, your voluntary ones, they control the brain. I need to reach out and grab my glasses. There it is. I told it what to do and it did that. It was ready to go. All right, so remember we talked about smooth muscle, okay? Smooth muscles and cardiac muscle movements don't require any conscious thought. They're involuntary. They do their thing all on their own. Your smooth muscles, a good example of that is your intestines. It creates peristalsis, which is the act of digestion. It's moving the food along and it's absorbing all that goodness. And it takes smooth muscle to do that. Cardiac muscles are only found in the heart, and it's another one of those involuntary muscles. All right, so the relationships, muscle skeletal refers to a partnership between bone and muscle. You've got to have both. You can't have one and not the other. It just doesn't work. Often functions in what we call antagonistic pairs, otherwise biceps and triceps. They work together to make something happen, but they have to both be there for the rotation movement, the abduction, the adduction, those kind of things. So it's very important. Without the skeletal muscles, the bones won't move. So these are all of the skeletal muscles. There's not every single one of them labeled, but all the major ones. Primary functions can produce heat, shivering, okay, and they also protect underlying structures besides the movement and the postural maintenance. And postural maintenance just means you can stand upright, you're erect, you're standing up. So movement, obviously, either walking from one place to another or running, that kind of thing. All right, respiratory system. Yippee zing. Remember, we're still in human anatomy. We're only 26 slides in, so we've got about 100 more left. So hang in there. You're doing great. The respiratory system, I'm not going to get into some major debate here about the respiratory system or description, but there it is. It's in your book. What's really important to understand that it's responsible for breathing, okay? It's responsible for respiration and the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Breathing is a mechanical function. Either it's automatic, you breathe on your own, or we have to breathe for you. Okay. So it's either automatic or mechanical. Automatic is breathing on your own. Mechanical means I have to take a bag valve mask or some kind of ventilator and ventilate you. Respiration is about the exchange of gases. Okay. We have what's called pulmonic respiration, which is the exchange of gases within the pulmonale, the lungs. And then we also have metabolic respiration, which is the exchange of gases down on the cellular level. We'll get more and more involved in that as we go along, but I do want you to just take into mind and take into mindset that all this occurs as the oxygen and carbon dioxide is being exchanged at the vessel levels at the alveoli. Okay, you have billions of alveoli at the end of your bronchioles in your lungs that do that exchange of gases. But this is your basics, your diaphragm, the bases of the lungs, the carina is the midpoint or the divisional point of the left and right bronchi. The apex of the lungs, you have the upper apices, okay, the tips. The alveoli themselves, the bronchioles, all of this is the lower airway, trachea, alveoli, bronchioles, and main bronchus. Your upper airways, your nasopharynx, the nasal air passages, your pharynx, your oropharynx, mouth, epiglottis, and larynx. You need to know these. You need to know if I say to you, what part of the airway is the larynx in? You need to be able to say upper airway. If you can't, you'll miss that on a test. And, you know, you just got to know this stuff. The bronchioles are in the lower airway. The alveoli are in the lower airway. The alveoli exchange gas. You need to know these things because you're going to see them on a test. You're absolutely. So let's get in a little bit more detail. Pharynx, okay, that includes the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. The larynx, which is the vocal cords, where the area where your vocal cords are. Okay, the glottis is the hole or the opening. They're located at the base of the larynx. It marks that transition point, okay, between the upper and lower airways. Nostrils lead to the nasopharynx, and the mouth leads to the oropharynx. The trachea is the windpipe, okay. Something about the trachea that's interesting is that it's like a vacuum cleaner hose. It will not collapse. It has cartilage that keeps it firm, so there's no way that it's going to collapse. If it didn't have those cartilage rings, every time you took a breath, it would be like a suction unit, and it go, and it would collapse. Okay. The epiglottis is a thin leaf-shaped toilet flap, is what we call it. So when you swallow, okay, it closes your trachea so that the fluid or food doesn't go down into your lungs. It's a very important organ that's in our body that we need to pay attention to. So let's go to lower airway now. All right, so the lower airway, okay, thyroid cartilage, which is where your Adam's apple is. Everybody feel that? There it is, okay. Cricocartilage, cricothyroid membrane, that begins that divisional down into the lower airway. The thyroid cartilage, it's like cartilage. It really is. It's like gristle. It's very hard and thick, and it protects your trachea. Gives it a level of protection from just day-to-day kinds of things that we may do. And then as we move further down into the trachea and windpipe, it branches off down into the left and right main bronchus and goes down into the smaller bronchi and end up in the alveoli, and the alveoli is where that exchange of gases happen. So knowing that this is your lower airway, any of these items are testable material on the lower airway. Don't miss them. Lungs. Each lung is divided into lobes. Okay, within the lobes, the bronchi and the bronchioles are in there. The alveoli, like I mentioned earlier, allow for the exchange of gas. Oxygen we need to bring in, okay, and absorb it into our circulation system. And we need to breathe out the carbon monoxide that's coming out of the blue side, okay, the unoxygenated side. That's the way we get rid of it. There's two gases that we absolutely have to exchange on a constant basis every time we breathe. That's oxygen and carbon dioxide. Mechanics. Okay, the mechanics of breathing. The lungs follow the motion of the chest wall, okay, expanding and contracting with it. The pleura, okay, you have visceral pleura that covers the lungs. Visceral pleura covers the lung. You can see here, this is all visceral pleura. It's a sac that goes around the lungs. That's all visceral pleura there, okay? The parietal pleura lines the inside of the chest, okay? So the parietal pleura is on the outside of the visceral. It lines the chest wall. there's a little bit of fluid. There's a thin layer of it between them that allow us to breathe. It lubricates those lungs as it slides up and down inside of the chest wall. And what's making that happen is the diaphragm. The diaphragm contracts, all right, and what it does is it pulls down on these lungs and allow the lungs to expand. And when they expand, oxygen comes in. Zoom, it comes right down through the windpipe, okay? The outside air, which is 21% oxygen, comes in. What happens next is it travels on down into the alveoli where the exchange of gas happens. And then to get rid of that carbon dioxide, the diaphragm will relax, okay? It's a passive phase and inspiration is an active phase. The brain has to tell the diaphragm to pull down, okay, or to contract, all right? It's like a rubber band. It pulls down, and so it allows the lungs to expand and get bigger and oxygen come in. If you know anything about syringes, okay, when you pull down on the plunger of a syringe, air is pulled out of the surrounding area. If you don't have a needle on it or anything, it comes down into the syringe by negative vacuum pressure. Okay, we'll talk about this later, but that's how that works. Okay, and then when your diaphragm relaxes, it pushes the lungs back into being smaller, and it pushes the carbon dioxide out. Muscles, okay, also involved in the cervical muscles, intercostal, the abdominal, and the pectoral muscles. It all helps us to breathe. But this is a nice diagram that gives you the thoracic cavity, the abdominal cavity, where it divides, right there at the level of the xiphoid process, and where the beginning of the vena cava begins. You can also see the aorta here, okay, and the vena cava for the return, and then the diaphragm runs right along here. And this is a vertebrae, okay, this is one of your spinal vertebral bodies, your vertebrae. All right, that's the muscles for breathing. It's what we talk about, what makes us breathe. Inhalation, just like we were talking about earlier, diaphragm intercostal muscles contract, enlarging the thoracic cage. Pressure within the thoracic cavity decreases and the lungs fill. Remember, we said negative pressure. Okay, negative pressure ventilation is the active part of the respiratory cycle. Inhalation is. Exhalation, the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles relax. Thoracic cavity returns to its normal shape and volume, and the passive portion of the respiratory cycle where the carbon dioxide is now expelled. All right, physiology of the respiratory system. You got to have it, otherwise we do not get oxygen. We can't eliminate carbon dioxide, we die. Okay. Ventilation and respirations are two separate yet interdependent functions in the respiratory system. We talked about this earlier. You got to have both, okay? The ventilation is the movement of the air. Whether you're doing it on your own or I have to do it for you with a ventilator or the bag valve mask, whatever. Don't be, I've seen this mistake happen so many times where they talk about patient is breathing at 2 times a minute and they put a mask on the face that's called a non-rebreather. It doesn't ventilate. A bag valve mask ventilates. If you're breathing at 2 times a minute, that's not adequate. You're going to be blue. What's that called? Cyanosis? Yeah, exactly. You're going to be cyanotic because you're not moving enough. That is ventilation. Respiration is the process of the exchange of those gases. You got to have both. If we're not ventilating adequately, we're not exchanging those gases. We're not eliminating carbon dioxide, and we're not bringing in enough oxygen. Ventilation is the movement between the lungs and the environment. Respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. You got to have both. All right, so Oxygen and carbon dioxide move across a membrane between the capillaries and the alveoli via diffusion. I want you to remember that because this is a test question. Diffusion. All right. Diffusion is a passive process. Okay. It's by which the molecules move from an area with a higher concentration of any molecule to an area of lower concentration. So I'll just give you a perfect example. If you take a can of perfume, it is in a high concentration area. It's in that can, okay? And I got this area out here, which is, it doesn't have any perfume in it. It's an area of lower concentration or no concentration. So when I spray that perfume or cologne or deodorant or whatever, it moves from this area of higher concentration to this area of lower concentration, and then it diffuses out into the environment. That's a simple analogy of diffusion, okay? Don't eat a lot of beans because that's also diffusion as well. So think about that. That is the process of moving from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration, and then it spreads out. Okay, so that's just a simple way of talking about it. And it's all done because of pressures and gravity and or atmospheric pressure and those kind of things. You learn more about this in paramedic school, but let's just keep it simple. Okay. The respiratory system has to remove carbon dioxide waste, and it's done through the diffusion process. Carbon dioxide is the waste product of the production of energy. You burn the oxygen, and it creates carbon dioxide, and it happens on every single cell in your body. Your cell has to burn the glucose, okay, which is, you have to light the fire, you got to have the oxygen. These little guys that are called mitochondria, they're little furnaces in there that create that energy that makes the cell work. Without that, nope, we can't work. So that's how that works. So we have to get rid of the carbon dioxide. In a lecture that we'll give you, we'll talk about pickup trucks and dump trucks and Ubers. It'll help you to understand all of this. But anyhow, we'll get to that later. All right, so chemical control of breathing. The brainstem controls breathing by monitoring the levels of carbon dioxide in blood and spinal fluid. We have sensors in our carotid arteries, okay? And those sensors pick up how much carbon dioxide is in our body. Breathing is automatically controlled if the level of carbon dioxide or oxygen in arterial blood is too high or too low. That's why the sensors are in our carotid arteries. They're closest to the brain, and it knows, and so it'll control how much carbon dioxide and how much oxygen we're getting, so our brain stays sharp all the time. Breathing occurs, okay, as the result of a buildup of carbon dioxide in the cerebral spinal fluid, which causes the pH to decrease. Okay, the pH decreases. So when we have that buildup of carbon dioxide, pH decreases, we get acidotic. And what happens is that the medulla oblongata, remember we talked about down there in the foramen magnum, in the base of the skull, okay? It stimulates the phrenic nerve saying, hey, dummy, you got to breathe. You're not getting enough oxygen. So increase the rate of the contractions of the diaphragm so you'll breathe faster. The primary reason for breathing is to lower carbon dioxide levels, not to increase oxygen levels. Listen to that. The primary reason for breathing is to lower carbon dioxide levels, not increase oxygen levels. We are carbon dioxide dependent. That is our trigger mechanisms because that's what those carotid artery sensors tell us to do. When that carbon dioxide builds up, it says, hey, breathe faster. Does that make sense? We don't, it's not as, people sometimes get that confused. That's a test question. So make sure you got that. So we call this the hypoxic drive, okay? That hypoxic drive is a backup system to control respiration. The stimulus to breathe comes from low oxygen levels, okay? We have low oxygen levels, we have too much, carbon dioxide. So we need to lower that carbon dioxide by giving us more oxygen. Okay, I hope that isn't too confusing. If you have any questions, come see me or ask your instructor. But that's why we breathe, okay? So we talked about the nervous system, medulla oblongata initiates ventilation cycles, plain and simple. Primarily stimulated by carbon dioxide levels, and overall, it helps to control the rhythm of the breathing and initiate respiration, sets the base and pattern for the respiration, and sends the signal to the diaphragm via the phrenic nerve. Please remember phrenic nerve. That's what controls our breathing. That's a test question. Don't miss it. Pons, they're down in the base of the medulla. They have two areas which help for augment for respiration during emotional or physical stress. The pons will actually get us in a state of hyperventilation, because of emotion. So we may need to try to slow that down the best we can. Can't tell the pons to stop it because the anxiety is real, but we can try to control our breathing manually ourselves to begin to slow that down. The pons very specifically help change the depth of the inspiration or expiration, or both. Remember that. That could be a test question. The pons help to change the depth of inspiration, expiration, or both. Not only a test in your classroom, but also National Registry. So put that down. Okay, don't miss it. Don't miss it. If you miss it, you can't tell you I didn't tell you. All right. All right, ventilation. Tidal volume, the amount of air that's moved in and out of the lungs. Better remember that one too. Tidal volume. It's like the wave, tide, okay? It's the amount of air that's moved in and out of the lungs. Generally, it's about 500 cc's or 500 milliliters. 500. That's what we bring in, and that's what we expire. 500. Inspiratory reserve is the volume, is the deepest breath you can take in. That's your reserves. That's, right around 800 mLs, okay? Somewhere between 600 and 800 mLs, but it is the deepest breath that you can take after a normal breath, all right? So that's your inspiratory reserve. Your inspiratory means I'm bringing it in. Expiratory means I'm breathing it out, okay? Expiratory reserve volume is the maximum amount of air you can forcibly breathe out after a normal breath. So take a normal breath, then you blow it all out. Okay, that's all of it. That is your expiratory reserve volume. Now, one more. Let's talk about two more actually. Residual volume. Residual volume is the gas that remains in the lungs after exhalation, normal exhalation. Okay, and dead space. Dead space is a very simple concept. It's just any place that's in between that doesn't exchange gas. Your trachea does not exchange gas. Okay, your bronchi do not exchange gas. What happens, the exchange of gas is in the alveoli, okay? So those are dead spaces. Your mouth doesn't exchange gas, it's not part of the true respiratory exchange system. So it has no alveoli and little to no gas exchange. All right, next one. All right, last one, minute ventilation. It's used to assess the adequacy of ventilation, amount of air that moves in and out of the lungs in 1 minute. Folks, I'm going to tell you right now, watch. You got to have it. You probably heard me already say it in orientation. You've heard me say it in class. You're going to be inspected when you do your uniform inspections that you've got complete uniform on, because you got to be able to count this, okay? You can't use it digitally or anything else. You got to count pulse. You got to count respirations, all right? So sometimes you got to count contractions when mom's having a baby. So you need to be able to do that effectively and not lose track of the count. Minute volume equals respiratory rate times tidal volume. Minute volume is respiratory rate times tidal volume. So that's just something to remember. Minute volume is how much you're going to breathe in 1 minute. It's respiratory rate times tidal volume. Characteristics of normal breathing. Let me tell you something. A long time ago, I had an anesthesiologist say, Jeff, I want you to remember something. Normal breathing is silent. You don't hear me breathing, do you? I hope not. But if you hear somebody when you walk into the room that's going, that's not normal. They probably have an obstruction, okay? And that's not normal. You're going to have to do something about it. Normal rate and depth is tidal volume. Okay, regular rhythm or pattern of inhalation, exhalation, it should be normal. It shouldn't be, clear audible breath sounds on both sides of the chest. You need to be able to listen to it with your stethoscope. They should be nice and clear. Nice and clear is just you hear the wind coming through, the inhalation, the exhalation. No weird sounds. Weird sounds are what we call adventitious sounds. They include rhonchi, rails, crackles, any of those sounds, wheezes, those are adventitious sounds. And there should be a regular rise and fall of movement on both sides of the chest. They're equal. One shouldn't go up and the other one not. Okay, that's a problem. We'll talk about that later in trauma. Okay, circulatory system. All right, everybody take a breath here because this is a big one. We're going to get through this. All right, it's a complex arrangement of connected tubes. All right, hoses. All right, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins. All right, you have two circuits, plain and simple. You have the systemic circulation and the pulmonary circulation. Systemic circulation is what controls the body. Pulmonary is what runs through the lungs. The systemic circulation primarily is the one that supplies all the oxygenated blood, and the pulmonary circulation also manages the unoxygenated and oxygenated blood to get it back into the heart. Okay, so and we'll get more detail here. Pretty simple stuff. All right, so circulatory system anatomy. This is in your book. Okay, this figure shows the circulatory system. It shows the divisions. You have the right side here, okay, which is the blue side. It is the low pressure side. Low pressure side, okay, is what carries all the unoxygenated, or it has all the CO2 in it. It's carrying it back to the heart, okay, and then putting it into the lungs to be reoxygenated. I like to call it the low pressure sucking side, okay? Because notice that it's returning to the heart. It has to suck back into the right atrium, okay? The unoxygenated blood always comes back into the right atrium, all right? Then it's pumped down into the heart in the right ventricle. The right ventricle then pushes it up into the pulmonary artery to be reoxygenated in the lungs, okay? All right, so it is the low pressure side. Now notice the red side, which is the oxygenated blood. The pulmonary artery here at the bottom returns it after it's gotten its oxygen into the left atrium, dumps it down into the left ventricle, and then pushes it up through the aorta where it goes back to our body and all the cells. And then the process starts all over again. Okay? So that's how it works. You look here in the upper body. All right, these are all the tissues, the brain and everything else. Lower body all the way down to your feet. All right, they get the oxygen, they get regenerated, and then they expel the CO2 back into the vena cava side to be returned back to the heart. It's one big cycle. It just flows this way, okay? Please study this. And if you have any questions, ask us. Ask me. You will have a lecture on this in the classroom to make sure that you understand these concepts. But this is simple stuff. There's some models that are in the classroom that you can look at, including projects that students have done that helps to explain this process. But if you have any questions, be sure to ask me or one of your instructors. All right, so the heart itself, it's a hollow muscular organ. It's made of those cardiac cells. It works as two paired pumps. Each side is divided into a left side and a right side, okay? Pretty simple stuff. Your heart is 4 chambers. It has 2 atriums and 2 ventricles. All right, pretty simple. The left side is very muscular because remember, it's high pressure. The right side is thinner, it's low pressure. The atriums are in the upper chambers, the ventricles are the lower chambers. Circulation. The heart receives its own blood supply from the aorta via the coronary arteries. The right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood from the veins of the body. Oxygenated blood returns from the lungs through the pulmonary vein into the left side of the heart, and is pumped into the aorta and then back to the arteries of the body. The flow of blood through the heart is governed by one-way valves. It doesn't allow it to back up. Right? It just circulates round and round and round and round. Those valves don't allow it to back up. That's a good thing, otherwise we'd be a mess. All right, so in these figures that are in your book, it shows the right and left side and what relationships that they have. Study this, and please, if you have questions, you're going to be doing an organ. We don't want you to do any more hearts, but if you want to do a circulation system, great. There's a few of them out there in the classroom, some models that were built by previous students. Look at them. It'll help you to understand these concepts. And again, if you have questions, talk to your instructor. Normal heart rate is 60 beats to 100. Stroke volume is the amount of blood that's moved by 1 beat. Cardiac output, that's simple. It's the amount of blood that's moved in 1 minute. Heart rate times stroke volume equals cardiac output. I'll again say, heart rate times stroke volume equals cardiac output. Now, you're going to know what the heart rate is, but you don't know what the stroke volume is. The only way you can measure that is if the patient has an arterial line, and we know how much blood is flowing through that arterial line during that period of time. So, but you can calculate this, and you can understand what cardiac output is. Electrical conduction system. We have a network of electrical circuits that are within our heart. It's specialized tissue that are capable of initiating and conducting electrical current, specifically the SA node, the AV node, the Purkinje fibers. It's what allows that electricity to flow through the pump, beats in an organized manner. Okay, we're going to talk much more about this in the basic life support section, about what happens when it gets irregular and how it makes ineffective pumping and when you need to shock it using an AED. So very important stuff, but I want you to remember that electrical impulses begin high in the atria, in the SA node, which is the sinoatrial node. Then it travels to the atrioventricular node, and then down to the Purkinje fibers. You need to know that. It's in your book. It is testable material. So if you see that, you say, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't learn that. Yes, you did, because I just told you about it. Find it in your book and memorize it. SA nodes on the top, AV nodes in the middle, Purkinje fibers are down in the bottom. Make sure you know that, because you'll see that on your test. Arteries, they carry blood from the heart and the body tissues. They're made of very fine circular kind of muscle tissues. Arteries contract to accommodate for the loss of blood volume and increase blood pressure. Our body has to tell it to do that. We do that through chemical processes to say, okay, we don't have as much blood, you need to squeeze to increase blood pressure. Okay, and then it naturally will go back to a more of a relaxed state as the compensation happens when we get more volume. The aorta is the main artery. It leaves the left side of the heart and carrying freshly oxygenated blood to the body. It has many branches that supply the vital organs. Pulmonary artery, it carries oxygen depleted blood to the lungs. And I want you to remember this. Don't screw this up. I've seen this happen too many times on tests. When we're talking about the pulmonary circulation system, okay, not talking about systemic, it changes the rules. In the pulmonary system, the artery, okay, does not have oxygenated blood. It's trying to get it. It's putting it into the heart, okay? And to return it back to the body, okay, it's already oxygenated, so the pulmonary vein will send it back. Okay, so don't get those two mixed up. All right, it will screw you up, and you'll end up missing it on a test. Okay, so the pulmonary artery carries unoxygenated blood. The pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood back to the heart so it can be distributed through the aorta back into the body. Okay? Pulse, it's a wave. Okay, like riding the wave, man. Every time the heart contracts, it creates a pulse. Okay, pulse is created by a forceful pumping of blood. It's that simple. That's a test question. Okay, out of the left ventricle into the major arteries. It's palpated most easily at the neck, the wrist, or the groin. As you can see on this diagram, those are the points. These are all the points that you can, feel a pulse that are most readily available. There's your radial again, okay? Radial pulse, your carotids, okay, carotid, all right, very good. Then you have some around your face as well that you can feel when you palpate around the face. Capillaries, very important stuff. This is where that exchange of gas and nutrients happens. They're fragile divisions of the arterial system that allow contact between the blood and the tissues. Oxygen and nutrients pass from blood cells and plasma in the capillaries to the individual tissue cells throughout the thin walls of the capillaries, right? Plain and simple. And then the carbon dioxide just does the reverse of that and other metabolic waste. It passes in a reverse direction. Okay, so we can get rid of it. Capillaries connect directly at one end with the arterioles and at the other end with the venules. Please remember that. The arterioles, remember this is in the systemic side. This is out here, not in the pulmonary side. This is out here in the body. The arterioles carry oxygen and the venules take the carbon dioxide away to return it back to be expelled on expiration. Okay? All right? So those are pickup trucks are the arterial side where the red blood cells go. And the dump trucks are on the venule side. They're carrying the carbon dioxide back to the lungs to dump it off so it can be gotten rid of. Everybody with me on that? That's just a simple analogy. Veins. They return the oxygen depleted blood in the heart. They have thinner walls than arteries and generally larger in diameter. The major veins to include the superior vena cava, which carries blood returning from the head, neck, shoulders, and upper extremities. The inferior vena cava carries blood from the abdomen, pelvis, and the lower extremities. So you have the superior, which is superior, up high, inferior, which is low. And the division happens at the umbilicus. The division of the vascular resistance or the changes, what happens to make this work is you have to have what's called systemic vascular resistance. SVR is what creates blood pressure. The resistance to blood flow within these blood vessels, except for the pulmonary vessels, allow us to regulate the amount of pressure and back pressure that's going on. And it's done through chemical processes that happens with our body. Especially in the cases of shock when we really need blood in certain parts of our body. Blood compositions. We have red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. Red blood cells are called erythrocytes. You better jot this stuff down because these are test questions. Red blood cells are erythrocytes. They contain hemoglobin, which carries oxygen. You with me? Let's move to the next one. White blood cells are called leukocytes. They play a role in the body's immune system defense to fight off infection. Platelets. They are essential. Platelets are essential in the formation of blood clots. And finally, plasma is the liquid portion of blood. They contain water, which is the primary component, proteins, which are another primary component, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen, okay? Nutrients, all your cellular waste, and other hormones that we need for regulatory purposes of our immune system and our endocrine system. The spleen. I think I mentioned something about this earlier. It's the one that carries all our bad blood cells away. It's a filter. It's a big old filter. It gets all the bad bloods out and blood cells out and digests them. And then hemoglobin is recycled from there. It's very vascular and frequently is injured during trauma. Circulatory system physiology. Blood pressure is the force that exerts against the walls of the arteries. Systole is when the left ventricle contracts. When you're counting blood pressure, systole is that top number. Okay, it's when the ventricle contracts and it pumps blood into the ventricles to the aorta. Diastole, which is the bottom number, is when the ventricle relaxes and the heart fills with blood. Those are test questions, folks. Systole and diastole. Readings. Again, with the blood pressure cuff, which is called a sphygmomanometer. Okay, the systolic blood pressure is the high point of the wave. Diastolic is the lower part of the wave. Normal circulation in adults. It's automatically adjusted and readjusted on a constant basis. Okay, perfusion of the circulation of blood and organ or tissue in adequate amounts to meet the current needs. During different times we have current needs, so it automatically our body tries to reach what we call homeostasis. That's a good word. You'll see that somewhere. That's balance. Okay, homeostasis is balance. If we get in a hypoperfusion state, what is what happens when we get into a hypoperfusion state? Hypo meaning lack of perfusion or lack of circulation. We get inadequate circulation and it can create shock. Okay, the system can adjust to compensate for small amounts of blood or fluid loss. The vessels constrict to give us a squeeze, and then the heart pumps harder, okay, so that we can push more blood. But with a large loss, the adjustment fails and the patient goes into shock. So it can only compensate for so long before the patient goes into shock. So mean arterial pressure, or MAP, can help to detect shock. The average arterial pressure during systole and diastole. So systole, remember, that's that top number, and diastole being the bottom number. For us to calculate what MAP means, okay, mean arterial pressure equals cardiac output times stroke volume. So if we look at this diagram, all right, we have 5,600 milliliters per minute, or 5.6 liters per minute is the mean average that we will push through the body for cardiac output. And then 80 times per minute, we're pushing 70 mLs per beat, which gives us a mean average BP, which equals heart rate times stroke volume, which equals the time peripheral vascular resistance. To maintain blood pressure in massive hemorrhages or reduction of stroke volumes, the heart rate must increase and the vascular resistance must increase. If we don't have these things, we will go into shock very, very quickly. They work in harmony with each other. Your body understands this. Now, this is just an overview. You need to understand that mean arterial pressure will tell us. And that difference of mean arterial pressure is the top number and the bottom number. So if you have a pressure of 100 over 50, your MAP is roughly 50. Okay, we don't want that. It needs to be better than that. It should be much higher than that. So think about in terms of how it works based on systemic vascular resistance. The systemic vascular resistance, the more resistant you have, okay, the more it will squeeze, okay? And then when the heart rate increases, it helps to reduce shock. If you need more information and you don't understand it, come see me. I'll give you some good analogies of it, representations, or ask your instructor. Functions of blood. Most blood is unevenly distributed through the body, okay? The ultimate function is perfusion. Approximately 30% of the blood is found within the heart, the arteries, and the capillaries. 70% of the blood is found within the veins and the venules. Okay, so 30% is in the oxygen side and 70% is in the unoxygenated side. And the ultimate function is perfusion, okay? We need to have nutrients moving from the capillaries into the interstitial space, which is the space between the cells, and into the intracellular space, which is within the cell. Interstitial, between. It's interstitial, between the tissues. Intracellular, which is inside of the cell itself. Waste move from the cell through the interstitial space and into the capillaries. Once inside the capillaries, two main forces are at work. You have what's called hydrostatic pressure, which occurs as fluid pushes against the vessel walls to force the fluid out of the capillary. Then you have oncotic pressure, which is the opposing force and occurs because of proteins in the blood plasma cause the water to be pulled into the capillary by diffusion. Remember what diffusion is, moving from an area of higher concentration to lower concentration. And then finally, clotting and coagulation. These are all things that are so important to be able to properly distribute and to move everything that needs to be moved. You may see some of this, but this is not a failure kind of item. This is more of a knowledge building base type of piece of the lecture. If you miss these on a test, like oncotic pressure versus hydrostatic pressure, you're not going to fail. But you need to understand these concepts as you move along into your next level into being a paramedic. Nervous system. This is something that's important that you need to know because it's the fight or flight systems. The sympathetic nervous system sends commands, to the adrenal glands, and epinephrine, adrenaline, and norepinephrine are secreted to stimulate the heart and blood vessels to either constrict or make it go faster. The heart and blood vessels have what are called alpha adrenergic receptors and beta. If you'll simply remember, alpha constricts, beta dilates, If you just remember those two things right now, you're within the ballpark. Specifically, adrenergic means related to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland. It is your adrenal gland that secretes these two catecholamines or hormones. Alpha adrenergic receptors are found in the blood vessel. So when they get stimulated, the blood vessels constrict. That helps us to increase blood pressure when we need it. Beta adrenergic receptors are found in the heart and lungs. When beta 1 receptors are stimulated, the heart rate and the force of contractions increase. When beta 2 receptors are stimulated, the bronchi and the lungs dilate. So beta 1, adrenergic receptors, causes stimulation and force of contraction. When beta 2 causes bronchioles to dilate. So if an asthmatic, when we stimulate their beta 2, it allows those bronchi to relax and they can breathe better. We have medications that we give patients. They're little albuterol, they're inhalers. Those are beta 2 type of medications. So put that in your head. Some test questions on this, but put that in your head. But just remember, alpha and beta. Primarily, alpha is a constrictor and beta are dilators, except for what we're talking about in the heart. Beta 1 does do some stimulation. Not constriction, but forcing the contractions, but not constriction, just stimulation. All right, let's move on. All right, so this diagram gives you a nice overview of the central nervous system, the processes and the information, the commands and body function and how it works. You have the central nervous system that takes care of all the inside stuff, all the primary stuff, the commands to the adrenal glands, epinephrine, adrenaline are all secreted to stimulate the heart, through the sympathetic nervous system. Very specifically, heart and blood vessels have alpha adrenergic receptors and beta. Alpha means related to the adrenal gland, like we mentioned earlier. Alpha adrenergic receptors are found in blood vessels. When stimulate, they cause the blood vessels to constrict. And then beta is either force of contractions or dilation. And this diagram gives you a nice overview of that. So study this up, and if you have questions on us, let us know. Parasympathetic nervous system. This is the slow down, not the fight and flight. The parasympathetic nervous system causes the heart rate to slow down and beat more weakly, That's the feed part of the side. Sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system balance each other. It's all receptor sites that tells us what to do. And our brain knows, because of what the body's going through, how it needs to react. Anatomy, physiology, the nervous system is probably very, very complex. You have the central and the peripheral. Central nervous system obviously is related to the brain. Peripheral nervous system is everything out in the appendicular skeletal area. That peripheral nervous system, nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. You have somatic nervous system, which regulates voluntary activities, and then your autonomic nervous system. So let's talk about this a little bit more in detail. Brain, central, cerebrum, cerebellum, and brainstem. All of those are the functions. Cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. That's a test question. Responsible for higher brain function. Cerebellum controls balance, muscle coordination, posture. And then the brainstem is all of our life functions. How to breathe, how to heartbeat, those kind of things. They're very, very important, and they work in harmonious ways in order for us to function. Cerebral spinal fluid is the fluid that cushions and protects the brain and the spinal cord. We have circulation within the head itself. Oxygenated blood is supplied via carotid arteries, okay? And then the deoxygenated blood is drained by the internal and external jugular veins. So oxygen goes in, carbon dioxide comes out. And it's directly in the heart that makes that happen. Through the carotid arteries, the oxygen goes in. Through the jugular, both external and internal, they return the unoxygenated blood back to the heart or back to the lungs to be reoxygenated. Quick, simple circulation. Spinal cord, we saw this earlier in a diagram. It's the extension of the brainstem. It leaves the skull via the foramen magnum. Okay, it's encased by the vertebral column. Ends up at the level of the second lumbar vertebrae. And its primary function is to transmit all the messages between the brain and the body, all of its organs. As you can see, these are called durotomes. All of these, you have the same ones, left side, right side, and it's carrying all the signals to all the tissues and all the organs and telling them what to do. Your brain tells them what to do it. That's what all this yellow stuff is. Okay, this is the spinal cord itself. And these nerve endings go off to all the different parts of the body, tell it what to do. Peripheral nervous system, divided in two portions, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is a part of the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, okay? Then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, which returns the body back to a resting state. So sympathetic, fight or flight, okay? Parasympathetic, I'm done, okay. I'm going back to rest. Okay, sympathetic, ready to go again. Parasympathetic, okay, I'm done. Time to have a beer. No. And the somatic system is just your muscles and stuff, and stuff that works when the brain tells it to. Two types of nerves, sensory and motor. Plain and simple. Sensory nerves carry the information from the body to the central nervous system. Okay? I reach out and I touch fire, 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 and it carries it from the body to the brain, and the brain, or central nervous system, sends it down to the muscle and goes, ow, don't do that. Okay? So sensory and motor, really simple stuff. Integumentary system, okay? This is your skin. Integumentary system, okay? Integumentary system, integrable, okay? This is your skin. It's the largest skin. It has two components, the epidermis and the dermis. The epidermis is superficial. The dermis is deeper, okay? Subcutaneous fat lies beneath. It insulates us. It's one of the most wonderful organs in the world. It keeps us warm, keeps us cool, and it protects us. It's a watertight barrier and keeps germs from coming in and making us sick. Very good stuff. All right, it has three major functions. Like I said, it controls the body and the environment, regulates body temperature, and transmits information to the brain. All right, good. Next, we're going to talk about the digestive system. All right, resuming on. Let's move on to the digestive system. All right, so digestive system is also called the gastrointestinal system because gastro meaning stomach, intestinal obviously the intestines. The components of the digestive system will begin with the abdomen. The abdomen contains major organs of digestion and also excretion. The quadrants are divided up into those 4 quadrants. We've talked about this before. Right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant, so on and so forth. The organs in those areas, the right upper quadrant, and these are testable materials, the right upper quadrant contains the liver, gallbladder, and a portion of the colon. The left upper quadrant contains the stomach, the spleen, and a portion of the colon. The colon that we're talking about is the transverse colon. So you're going to get test questions on this. So remember that. The right upper quadrant, liver and gallbladder. Left upper quadrant, stomach and spleen, and both have a portion of the colon in it. Right lower quadrant contains 2 portions of the large intestine, the cecum and the ascending colon. The ascending colon is going up, the poop is flowing upwards, okay? And then the transverse, it goes sideways, and the descending, it drops down. Left lower quadrant contains the descending and the sigmoid portions of the colon. The small intestine and pancreas, large intestines, and the urinary bladder lie in more than just one quadrant. It's very dispersed throughout both sides. The kidneys and pancreas are behind the abdominal cavity. This is the retroperitoneal space. Retro, to the back. Peritoneal, inside the peritoneum and the back of the abdominal cavity. This is one that I see a lot of people, screw up on a test. Is the retroperitoneal is the back part of the abdominal space. So please don't miss that one. I told you, don't miss it. Okay? So make sure you remember that one. All right, this figure shows the main organs of the digestive system, just like what we talked about. You need to know these basic systems. Okay, so look up on this, study up on this, and you'll do well. All right, this figure shows the main organs of the digestive system. Okay, the digestive system. We also have a piece of circulation system, just so you know where it lies. You have the aorta, which carries, the oxygenated blood, and this is the inferior vena cava because it's dropping down below the heart and it goes down. So what you're doing there is the vena cava, if you remember correct, that's where the unoxygenated blood returns back to the heart and is dumped into the lungs through the pulmonary artery to be reoxygenated. All right, so the mouth, beginning in this area, this mouth consists of lips, cheeks, gums, teeth, and tongue. The hard and soft palate. You also have salivary glands in there, 2 sets of type of salivary glands. Saliva is approximately 98% water and 2% mucus, salts, and organic compounds. The oropharynx is a tubular structure that extends from the back of the mouth to the esophagus and the trachea. We actually will teach you in your airway section, we use a airway adjunct that goes into the oropharynx. The esophagus is a soft tube. It's collapsible. It's about 10 inches long that extends from the end of the pharynx to the stomach. Muscles in the wall of the esophagus propel that food down into the stomach when we swallow. The stomach is a hollow organ in the left upper quadrant. Intestines are a hollow organ. You'll see test questions on this. A solid organ is your liver. A hollow organ is your intestines, okay? You need to know the difference because you'll see that on a test question, and it's a little bit different when you get injuries, such as penetrating injuries, on what kind of damage it can do. The stomach receives food and stores it and provides it for its movement into the bowels. The pancreas. The pancreas is a flat, solid organ that lies below and behind the liver and stomach. That's the test question. Don't miss that. The pancreas is a solid organ that lies below and behind the liver and stomach. You'll see that. Okay, so please take note of that. What the pancreas does for it, it contains 2 portions, the exocrine and the endocrine. The exocrine portion secretes pancreatic juice containing enzymes that aid in digestion. Specifically, it breaks down fats and starches and proteins. The endocrine system portion is called the islets or islets of Langerhans. Okay, what it does for us, it produces insulin and glucagon. Insulin is a transporter of sugar. Glucagon is a replacement for sugar as need be in reserves. But the insulin is so very important, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the endocrine system in a little bit more detail. It's one of the ones that we call Ubers. Okay, insulins are Ubers because they transport sugar all over the body. We'll get into more explanation on that later. Okay, so the liver. Livers are a big, giant filter. It's a large, solid organ immediately beneath the diaphragm and in the right upper quadrant, extending somewhat into the left upper quadrant as well. The functions, is the bottom line, is it's a big filter. It gets rid of all the harmful stuff that's in our blood. It also is important in forming the factors needed for blood clotting and normal plasma production. It also produces bile to assist with digestion of fat, and it stores sugar. That's one of the things that you must remember. That's like emergency reserve sugar that your body can tap into if it hasn't eaten in quite a while. And it's also for immediate use if we need that energy all of a sudden. Now the bile ducts, as we talked about production of bile, which helps to digest, it connects to the liver to the small intestine, the bile duct, and it carries bile from the gallbladder, where bile is stored, into the duodenum. The duodenum is part of our intestines. The small intestine specifically are major hollow organs of the abdomen. It produces enzymes and mucus to aid in digestion, and it's composed of the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Okay, those are our composing valves or the separation valves that allow for peristalsis or digestion to happen. Large intestine, it's major, it's hollow. All it does is it's dumping out all the stuff. Okay, it's the organ consisting of the cecum, the colon, and the rectum. The major function of the colon is to absorb the final 5 to 10% of digested food and water from the intestines from the solid stool, because it will form solid stool after it moves that last bit of water. During your entire digestive process, that's how we get our water, is that we absorb it through our intestines. The appendix is down there. It's a 3 to 4 inch long tube that opens into the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestines, and into the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. It could easily become obstructed. We get fecal matter that gets in there and it becomes infected and inflamed, and it causes what we call appendicitis. The rectum itself is a large hollow organ at the lowermost end of the colon, and it's adapted to hold quantities of feces until you're ready to expel it. The anus is located at the terminal end. Sphincters is what controls the release of liquids and gases and solids from the digestive tract in the normal digestion and the excrement processes of our bodily functions. So physiology, how does this work? Okay, how does the digestion work? Well, first off, enzymes are added to food. We swallow, the enzymes are added to the food by the salivary glands that are in your mouth. It goes down with the food into the stomach, the liver and the pancreas and the small intestines. Okay, they convert the food to basic sugars. Basic sugars, fatty acids, and amino acids. The three basic products of digestions are carried across the wall of the intestine to the liver and to process further and to be stored and transported to the heart as necessary. Circulation via blood throughout the body is another big portion that allows us, to move all the nutrients and the waste. The circulation has to be intact. It does work hand in hand on getting all that goodness that we've gotten from the digestive system, the basic sugars, the fatty acids, and amino acids, to put it in the cells. The cells have to have this as a part of their life cycle and a part of creating energy. So, very important part. Digestion and consumption of food, it has to happen. That and water. Hydrate or die is what I like to call it. Lymphatic system, which is an interesting process. It is very, very specific. What it does, it's composed of the spleen, the lymph nodes, the lymph vessels, the thymus gland, and other components. Primarily, its responsibility is supporting circulation and also our immune system. Lymph is a liquid. It is a thin straw-colored fluid that transports materials from the lymph tissue into the central venous circulation via the thoracic ducts. Okay, that lymph is very, very important because those materials that it's transporting could be white blood cells, red blood cells, or anything that the body needs to support itself, the proteins for coagulation, platelets, and those kind of things. Anything that the body needs can come through the lymph and be able to be distributed. And it serves as basically an auxiliary circulation system as we need it. Lymph nodes are tiny oval-shaped structures that filter the lymph. Okay, the system helps to rid the body of toxins and other harmful materials as well. Endocrine system complex, hormones. Okay, it's a message and control system. Bottom line is that endocrine glands release hormones directly into the bloodstream. Each of the endocrine gland produces one or more types of hormones. Each hormone is a specific cause and effect on an organ or tissue or a process. Okay, brain controls all this. Specifically, it controls the release of those hormones. It uses a primary and secondary feedback loops to keep the body in balance. Remember we talked about homeostasis? Remember that word? It's creating balances. If you have excesses or deficiencies in these hormonal passages or pathways, it can cause some real severe disease processes such as diabetes. So these are the kind of things that we always wanted to, take into effect. That if we have changes in our body as we get older, we need to be aware of them. So they will happen sooner or later. That's why we have primary care physicians that watch over our blood work and things that can see those changes as they occur. There's the different parts of the endocrine system, the thymus, the testes in male, hypothalamus, pineal gland, pituitary glands, parathyroid, thyroid, adrenal glands, pancreas, and ovaries in females. So that's the general anatomy of the endocrine system. Urinary system. We got to get rid of waste. We also got to control fluid, how much fluid we have in our body, and pH. Urinary system controls the discharge of certain waste materials filtered from the blood in the kidneys. Primary functions is controlling fluid balance in the body, filter and eliminate the waste, and controlling our pH. All right, so genital system, its primary system is for reproduction. Male reproductive system consists of the testicles, the epididymis, the vas deferential, prostate gland, the seminal vesicles, and then also the penis. The testicles produce sex hormones in sperm cells, and the penis is also a part of the urinary system as well to get rid of our waste products. There we go. There's a diagram. This figure shows the organs of the male reproductive system. The female, it consists of the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, the cervix, and the vagina. The ovaries produce sex hormones and specialized cells for reproduction. There's cross-sectional views. These figures show the female reproductive system. As far as what we call the life support chain, to form their job, all cells in the body require oxygen, nutrients, and removal of waste. We've talked about this. The respiratory and circulation centers are the carriers of these supplies and waste. If something happens and interference occurs, the cells can be damaged and they can die. So we need to make sure that we eat right, we get plenty of hydration, we take care of ourselves. Cells specifically use oxygen to take available nutrients and turn them into chemicals. Specific chemicals turn into energy through metabolism. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It is used in energy metabolism and storage. You have two different types of metabolisms. You have aerobic metabolism, which uses oxygen, and then we have anaerobic. We do not want to be in anaerobic states. If we're in anaerobic states, oxygen is limited and we start developing things that are bad for us, specifically lactate. It causes us to get acidosis. Lactic acid can build up inside those cells when we don't have oxygen. As lactic acid and other wastes accumulate around the cells become toxic and can die. That's why I was talking about pH and pH relationships and oxygen relationships. You can have metabolic alkalosis, you can have metabolic acidosis, you can have respiratory alkalosis and respiratory acidosis. Our brain keeps that balance, that homeostatic balance, and watches all of this as long as our brain is functioning correctly and we're getting enough oxygen to do so. So movements of oxygen, waste, and nutrients occur by diffusion. We've talked about this. Moving from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. That is diffusion, okay? Cells, on the other hand, are surrounded by fluid that allows for easy movement of nutrients and waste. pH is the measure of acidity or alkalinity in a solution. The blood and lungs interact with each other continuously to help to maintain the pH level in the body, controlling the level of carbon dioxide. So, the deal is that we're around 7.35 to 7.45, okay? When it drops, it goes this way. We become acidotic. See, it says here, acidotic, all right? If it goes this way, we become alkalotic or basic, okay? As you can see here, there's things that can create this, you know. If you're heading towards acidosis, it's because you're consuming one or more of two different things, or you're retaining carbon dioxide, okay? That's what gets you into acidosis, and that is deadly, okay? It can be caused by a variety of different reasons, but we definitely want to eat correctly, have the right amount of fluid, be able to excrete waste, and be able to breathe properly, taking in enough oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide. Just as a simple analogy, I'm going to give you a simple analogy of acid and alkalosis. If you're hyperventilating, and we're talking about respiratory acidosis versus alkalosis, if you're hyperventilating, you're blowing off too much CO2. So if you don't have CO2 to create acidosis, you start going this way. You start going alkalotic, okay? We're not able to create any acid because we're blowing off all the carbon dioxide. We have to maintain some of it to maintain our pH. So we become alkalotic. Your fingers start to numb and everything else until you pass out. And when you pass out, you stop breathing. Well, when you stop breathing, you start building up more carbon dioxide in your body and you start going back to normal, okay? And once you get to that pH level between 7.35 and 7.45, you wake up and you start breathing again. Okay, very simple. And on just the opposite, if you stop breathing because you're unconscious, you'll very quickly develop more carbon dioxide because you can't get rid of it because you're not breathing, and you'll start going this way. And you'll get acidotic until you die. Okay, your body sooner or later can't control all that acid, can't deal with it, your cells will die. So you're not breathing. If we intervene and start breathing for you, say right here, you start going back that way again because we're giving you oxygen and because the carbon dioxide is being exhaled out when we stop, we ventilate, let go, carbon dioxide comes out, oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. You start going back that way, back to neutral. That's how that works. Okay, simple explanation. Okay, so that's bordering line on discussing with you acid-base balance. So good job, bearing with me there. We'll move on now. Pathophysiology is the study of how normal physiological processes are affected by disease. Respiratory compromise is the inability to move gas effectively. So we talk about hypoxia. This is what we're just talking about with acid-base balance. You have a decreased level of oxygen in the body, so you have an increased level of carbon dioxide. So it makes you what we call hypercapnic, okay? Is an elevated level of carbon dioxide. We have a wonderful little machine called end-tidal CO2 that we can measure this. It measures how much of CO2 is being exhaled from the body, okay? Normal end-tidal CO2 is registered in around 35 to 45, okay? So we can tell when you start having excess, if you're say 45, 55, 65, you're not breathing well enough, or the exchange of gas because your lungs are all filled with gunk from using vapes or whatever. It can't transfer that, diffuse that oxygen and carbon dioxide correctly. Then we're going to start seeing that, and then we have to breathe for you, okay? Because your carbon dioxide levels, we need to give you more oxygen because your body is now becoming hypoxic because you have a decreased level of oxygen in the body. There's more carbon dioxide than there is oxygen. So that's an example. Factors that impair ventilation: blocked airway, impairment of the muscle breathing, such as neuromuscular disease, loss of consciousness, obstruction of the airway. And then other factors include asthma, drug overdoses, trauma, allergic reactions, those kind of things. They'll all impair your ability to ventilate. Factors that impair respiration. Remember, respiration is the process. Ventilation is the act. Respiration is the process. Ventilation is the act. Okay. Factors that impair respiration: high altitudes. The further you go up, barometric pressure decreases, okay, with atmosphere. So then molecules move further apart, so they're less available. Those molecules moving apart is oxygen and nitrogen. So they're less available. It's, what we call, a lot of people call high altitude sickness, or the air is getting thin. Okay, I've heard different expressions, but it's because it's less available. So you also can have impaired movement of the gas across the cell membrane as well because of some kind of poison or whatever. Those can affect respiration. Ventilation and perfusion mismatch, the VQ ratio, describes how much gas is being moved effectively. Ventilation through the lungs and how much blood is flowing around the alveoli where the gas is exchanged. That's where perfusion occurs, okay? You got to have a balance. A mismatch occurs when one of those two variables are abnormal, such as you get an embolus, an emboli that's in one of the pulmonary vessels. It prevents the blood flow. Another one would be edema or fluid buildup inside the alveoli. When either one of those V's or Q's is impacted, respiratory compromise can occur very rapidly. Pulmonary embolism can be fatal very, very quickly. So if you see somebody short of breath and hypoxic, give them oxygen. They usually are complaining of chest pain. Get them to a hospital as soon as possible. Okay, effects of respiratory compromise on the body. Oxygen levels throughout the body fall and carbon dioxide levels rise. The brain detects an increase of carbon dioxide levels, so it increases the respiratory rate in an attempt to return the carbon dioxide levels to normal. If increased respiratory does not occur or effective in returning carbon dioxide levels to normal, the blood will become more acidic. Acid-base balance. We've got too much carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, we become acidotic. Blood oxygen levels will begin to fall, which will cause the brain to issue further commands to breathe faster, deeper, so on and so forth. Decreased oxygen levels will force those cells from moving from an aerobic, means with oxygen, to an anaerobic metabolism, which means with oxygen, and there'll be a creation of lactic acid, and that causes our respiratory acidosis. Please, if you have any questions on this, you can talk to me or one of your instructors. I'll be more than happy to explain this a little bit more in detail. I know it's overwhelming, but it's stuff you gotta know. Shock. Inadequate tissue perfusion. Period. It is a condition which organs and tissues receive an inadequate flow of blood and oxygen. Shock is categorized into several types depending on the cause, but it's impaired oxygen. Okay? If impaired oxygen delivery it's usually because of cellular hypoxia, or it causes cellular hypoxia, which leads to the anaerobic metabolism we were talking about, and how lactic acid produces out of that. And it kills the organs, kills the brain. It's just a bad plan. You're going to have a bad day with this. The effects of inadequate tissue or perfusion on the body, all of these. Lack of or level of oxygen supplies to the tissue falls. The cells engage in that anaerobic metabolism, producing lactic acid. Severe metabolic acidosis will ensue with that, leading to cardiac arrest. Baroreceptors detect decreases in blood pressure and initiate the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. We want some alpha properties in there, squeezing things and trying to increase heart rate and help us out there, and it just will fail. Heart rate increases, heart beats more forcefully, and the blood vessels constrict. All the interstitial fluids, the fluids that are between the cells, they move into the capillaries. We're trying to support, but if we don't get some help soon, the person will have severe consequences, organ damage and death, and maybe even overall, they'll die from shock. So we got to treat this. It's very serious. Cellular metabolism alteration. Impairment of cellular metabolism results in the inability to properly use oxygen and glucose at a cellular level. Cells create energy normally through aerobic, but when they start to crash and burn, they go into the anaerobic metabolism temporary as a backup. But the problem is it starts building up of lactic acid. That's the waste product of acidosis. You have a decrease in the hemoglobin's ability to bind and carry oxygen effectively, so it just makes things worse. Produces less energy in the form of ATP, so it makes it difficult for cells to function normally. We're having a hard time going back to that homeostasis, okay? Cellular injury up to that point may be repairable if we can restore perfusion quickly. If we can't, it causes damage that we can't recover from. So we want to stay away from that. Let's talk about a review now. Let's go over a few questions and see if you guys can come up with the answers. And if you have difficulties, again, reach out to me. So let's go with review question number 1. Which of the following is found in the retroperitoneal space? Remember, these are definite test questions, both National Registry and also, on our program as well. What do you think? All right. If you said kidneys, you are correct. Good job. There's your rationale for that. Next one. The cartilaginous tip of the sternum is called remember the little thing that's down there at the end? Playing the xylophone? Hint, hint? Okay. If you'd answer D, you are correct. The xiphoid process. There's your rationale for that one. A person with bilateral, what does bilateral mean? Femur fracture has There you go. B, fractures of both femurs. That's bad. Takes a lot of energy to do that. Here's your rationale. All right, the most. And notice this big letter, most. So it's number 1. There can only be one answer here. Most, in capital letters, prominent landmark on the anterior surface of the neck. So anterior, of the neck is what? What do you think? If you answered C, you are correct. Good job. Thyroid cartilage. The Adam's apple, remember? That's the most prominent. And that word most, you always got to pay attention to how the question is worded and any italics words or capitalized words, those kind of things. The most, there you go, there's your rationale. Insulin is produced in the, come on, you guys know this one. We've talked about this a lot. It's got the Ubers in it. Insulin is Ubers. Where is it produced? If you said B, ding, 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 you got it. Good job. There's your rationale. Blank connects muscles to bones. Blank connects muscles to bones. Not bones to bones, muscles to bones. If you said C, tendons, you are correct. Good job. There's your rationale. The normal resting adult heart rate is? Very good, B. Usually 60 to 100. Okay, 60 to 100. There's your rationale. The left atrium of the heart receives blank blood from the blank. Left atrium. Very good. If you said A, you are correct. It receives the oxygenated blood from the lungs via the pulmonary veins, pushes it down into the left ventricle, which pushes it up in the aorta and returns it to the body. Here's your rationale. The largest part of the brain is the, come on, easy one, come on. If you said A, cerebrum, you are correct. Because remember, there's three major parts of the brain: the cerebrum, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. Brainstem is down there in the bottom, controls all the bodily functions. The cerebellum is, your motion and coordination and everything. Your cerebrum is everything else. Good stuff. There's your rationale. Which of the following statements about red blood cells is false? And notice it says false. So again, there's only one answer. So there's three answers that the red blood cells do, and there's one that it does not. Digest these questions when they come up. And that way you'll understand them better on your answer. Don't just shoot out an answer. Read the question, look at big capitalized things like that. So which of the following statements of red blood cells is false? If you said C, you are correct. It most certainly does not do anything to fight infection. It carries oxygen and nutrients, all that kind of good stuff, but it does not fight infections. Which one does that? If you said leukocytes, you are correct. Okay, it's not the red blood cells, it's the white blood cells. All right. There's your rationale. All right, so with that, I hope this has been helpful. Like I said, human body is a big topic, a lot of stuff to know. You need to know this. If you need help, come see me. I'll be more than happy to talk to you about anything you want to talk about. And then also, you can also ask your instructor as well. With that, we'll see you next time. This is your brain.